Close your eyes and imagine the sky. Not as you know it, not as a canvas of clouds and sunlight and the gentle arc of birds in flight, but as a vast arena of violence, where men transform metal into instruments of death and hurl them at each other across distances measured in thousands of feet. The air at 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany, on December 20th, 1943, is so cold that moisture freezes instantly on any exposed surface, turning oxygen masks into sculptures of ice, turning the insides of bomber fuselages into freezer compartments where men shiver and pray and wait for the moment when their luck runs out. This is not the romantic sky of aviation pioneers. This is industrial slaughter conducted in 3 dimensions, and you are there, suspended in it, your life balanced on variables you cannot control: wind speed, flak trajectories, the skill or mercy of the enemy pilot who has just appeared off your right wing. Your name is Charlie Brown. You are 21 years old, which makes you old by the standards of bomber crews in 1942, makes you ancient by the standards of men who fly daylight missions over Germany, where the life expectancy can be measured in single-digit sorties. You are the pilot of a B-17 flying fortress called Ye Old Pub, and right now your aircraft is not flying so much as falling with style, struggling to maintain altitude with 2 engines dead, the tail section shredded by flak, hydraulics failing, the number 3 engine streaming oil in a dark banner that marks your position for every fighter and anti-aircraft gun within visual range. Your co-pilot is wounded. Your tail gunner is silent on the intercom, which means he is either unconscious or dead. The plexiglass nose of your aircraft has a hole in it the size of a dinner plate, and the wind screaming through it sounds like all the fury of a world gone mad. But it is not the damage that defines this moment. It is the presence. The German fighter that is pulled alongside you, so close you can see the pilot's face, can see the details of his leather flight jacket, the frost on his canopy, the way his aircraft rides the turbulent air with an ease that speaks of thousands of hours of flight time. His plane is a Messerschmitt Bf-109, painted in the mottled camouflage of the Luftwaffe, and mounted in its nose and wings are cannons and machine guns that could tear your crippled bomber apart in seconds. He is looking at you. You are looking at him. Between you is perhaps 50 feet of frigid air and the entire moral architecture of war, all its rules and necessities, and the terrible mathematics that transform human beings into targets, into statistics, into acceptable losses in pursuit of strategic objectives. His name, though you do not know it yet, will not know it for more than 40 years, is Franz Stigler. He is 27 years old. He has shot down 22 Allied aircraft, which makes him an ace several times over, which means he has killed men, has watched them fall burning from the sky, has learned to carry that weight the way soldiers throughout history have learned to carry it, by building walls inside themselves, by separating the act from the consequence, by becoming someone else when the killing begins. He has just taken off from an airfield near Bremen, scrambled to intercept the American bomber formation that has just finished dropping its payload on his homeland. He has climbed through the freezing air, expecting another routine engagement, another target, another number to add to his tally. But something happened when he saw your aircraft. Something shifted in that moment when he pulled alongside and looked through the torn metal of your fuselage and saw not a target, but a crew.
saw the wounded navigator slumped over his table, saw the frozen blood on the interior walls, saw the way your B-17 lurched and staggered through the air like a wounded animal trying to reach the forest before the wolves arrive. He saw, perhaps, his own brother who died in a bomber over North Africa. He saw, perhaps, himself in some parallel universe where the accidents of birth and citizenship had placed him in your seat instead of his own. The clouds below you are thick and gray, offering concealment if you can just reach them, if you can just coax your dying aircraft down to a lower altitude where the air is thicker and your engines might breathe more easily. Above you, the contrails of the bomber formation you were part of are already fading, white lines dissolving into blue. They have left you behind, because this is the rule, the terrible, necessary rule. The formation cannot slow for stragglers, cannot risk the many for the few. You are alone now, alone except for the enemy fighter riding your wing, close enough to kill you, close enough to end this with a single burst of cannon fire. And he does not fire. He simply flies there, matching your speed, your altitude, shadowing you like some strange guardian angel dressed in the colors of the enemy. And you do not understand why.
You grip the control yoke with hands that have gone numb, though whether from cold or terror, or the simple exhaustion of holding a dying aircraft level for the past 20 minutes, you cannot say. Every input you make, every slight adjustment of trim, every correction for the asymmetric thrust of your remaining engines feels like negotiating with a machine that has already given up, that is only continuing to fly through momentum and stubbornness and some quality of engineering that transcends mere metal and rivets. The B-17 was built to absorb punishment. You have heard the stories, seen the photographs of fortresses returning to England with holes large enough to walk through, with entire sections of tail missing, with engines torn away and wings shredded. But those aircraft had altitude to trade for distance, had the cushion of height that allowed gradual descent toward safety. You have no such luxury. You are barely maintaining 21,000 feet, losing 100 feet per minute, and the mathematics are brutally simple. At this rate, you will be at ground level, German ground level, in just over 3 hours. Franz watches you struggle. You can feel his eyes on you even when you're not looking directly at him, can sense the weight of his attention the way a prey animal senses a predator even in peripheral vision. He has moved his fighter into a position off your starboard wing, close enough that you can see the individual panels of his aircraft's skin, the stains of exhaust on the fuselage, the slight imperfections in the paintwork that speak of hasty maintenance between missions. His aircraft is pristine compared to yours. No damage, no streaming fluids, no desperate asymmetry. He is the predator in perfect health, and you are the wounded thing limping toward shelter that may not exist. But he still does not fire, and this absence of violence begins to transform from relief into something more complex, into confusion, into a kind of suspended dread where every second that passes without gunfire somehow intensifies rather than diminishes the tension. What is he waiting for? Is this some kind of psychological warfare, a German tactic to let you think you might survive just long enough to make the eventual attack more devastating? Or is something else happening here, something that exists outside the standard parameters of aerial combat? Inside your aircraft, your crew moves through their duties with the mechanical precision of men who have trained for disaster but never quite believed it would happen to them. Spencer, Pinky Luke,
Your top turret gunner has climbed down from his position, useless now, the turret mechanism destroyed by flak, and is tending to the wounded. Doc, your bombardier, is trying to seal the hole in the nose with anything available. Canvas, spare clothing, pieces of torn metal bent and wedged into place. The wind continues to shriek through every gap and puncture, turning the interior into a wind tunnel where loose papers and spent shell casings skitter and dance like debris in a tornado. You think about your training, about the lectures at Walla Walla Airy Air Base, where instructors with tired eyes told you the statistics, the probabilities, the cold calculus of survival in the European theater. 25 missions, that was the number. Complete 25 combat missions and you could go home, return to a world where the sky was not filled with flak and fighters and the constant awareness of your own fragility. This is your first mission, your first, and already the odds have revealed themselves to be not abstract numbers, but visceral reality, written in blood and hydraulic fluid and the labored breathing of wounded men. Franz, flying alongside you, is wrestling with his own calculations. He thinks of his commanding officer, Gustav Rodel, who told him once, after too much schnapps, in a moment of unguarded honesty, that there were rules that mattered more than orders, codes that transcended national allegiance. You are a fighter pilot first and a killer second. Never confuse the two. Franz had killed 22 men in the air, 22 pilots who had ejected or bailed out or simply disappeared in fireballs that consumed them before they could scream. But those kills had been clean, or as clean as killing can ever be. Fair fights, aircraft against aircraft, pilot against pilot. Not this, not the execution of a crippled bomber whose crew can barely defend themselves, whose gunners are dead or wounded, or conserving ammunition they know won't make any difference. He thinks of his brother, August, who died over North Africa flying a bomber not unlike the one struggling beside him now. August, who wrote letters home about fear and cold and the terrible beauty of war seen from above. August, who never came back, whose body was never recovered, who exists now only as a name on a casualty list and a photograph on their mother's mantle. If August's bomber had been crippled over enemy territory, if some British or American fighter had found him limping toward home, what would Franz want that enemy pilot to do? The answer forms in his mind before he fully acknowledges it, and with that answer comes a decision that will define the rest of his life, that will echo across decades and continents and the vast gulf of time that separates war from peace. He eases his throttle forward slightly, pulling ahead of your aircraft, positioning himself where you cannot help but see him. And then he does something extraordinary. He salutes, a crisp, formal gesture visible even through the distortion of cockpit glass and freezing air. And then he points down toward the clouds, toward the deck, toward the route that offers your only chance of survival. He is showing you the way home, an enemy pilot, a German ace, a man who should kill you, is instead trying to save you.
You see the salute, and for a moment your mind refuses to process it, rejects the information as impossible, as some kind of hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation or shock, or the simple cognitive overload of being 21 years old and responsible for 9 other lives while flying a machine that is disintegrating around you. Enemy pilots do not salute. Enemy pilots do not point toward escape routes. Enemy pilots do what they are trained to do, what the entire apparatus of modern warfare demands they do. They kill efficiently, without hesitation, without the contamination of empathy that might compromise the mission. But the salute happened. You saw it. Your co-pilot saw it. And now the German fighter is banking gently, descending, creating a path through the air that you understand you are meant to follow. You push the yoke forward. The B-17 responds sluggishly, reluctantly, the nose dropping with a groan of stressed metal and the whine of wind through 1,000 new openings. 2,000 feet, 3,000. The altimeter unwinds, and with each 100 feet of lost altitude, the air grows marginally thicker, warmer, less hostile to human life and mechanical function. The German fighter remains with you, positioned now slightly ahead and to the port side, close enough that any anti-aircraft gunner on the ground will see him first, will hesitate before firing because he is clearly Luftwaffe, clearly one of their own. You begin to understand what he is doing. He is not just showing you the way, he is escorting you, shielding you, using his presence as a kind of safe passage through the killing fields below. Franz Stiegler knows what this act will cost him if discovered. The Luftwaffe has rules, orders, doctrines written in the blood of previous campaigns and the strategic necessities of total war. Allowing an enemy bomber to escape, actively assisting its escape, is not merely against orders, it is treasonous. It is the kind of act that ends with a firing squad or worse, with the slow death of a court-martial and disgrace that extends to one's family, one's comrades, everyone associated with the failure to do one's duty. He thinks of these consequences as he flies, maintaining his position relative to your crippled fortress, and he accepts them with the fatalism of a man who has already died 12 times in his imagination, who has survived long enough in combat to understand that survival is mostly luck dressed up as skill. But there is something else driving him now, something that transcends fear of consequences or even the memory of his dead brother. It is the sudden, crystalline understanding that he has been given a choice, not by his commanders or his country or the vast impersonal machinery of war, but by circumstance, by the random conjunction of his flight path and yours, by whatever forces govern the universe's distribution of mercy and cruelty. He can kill you or he can save you, and no one will ever know which choice he made except the two of you and God, if God still watches this particular corner of his creation where men murder each other in the frozen sky. Below you, the landscape of Germany unfolds in winter browns and grays, fields and forests and small villages that look almost peaceful from this altitude, almost innocent, as though the war is something happening elsewhere, in some other dimension where the rules are different. You can see the winding silver thread of a river, the geometric patterns of agricultural land, a church steeple rising from a cluster of buildings. Somewhere down there, people are living their lives, baking bread, tending children, trying to survive the winter and the war and all the 1,000 daily challenges that don't pause just because aircraft are falling from the sky. You wonder if they look up when they hear engines. You wonder if they can tell the difference between friend and enemy, between living and the soon-to-be dead. The clouds you were aiming for remain distant, tantalizingly out of reach, but Franz is leading you on a route that hugs the terrain, that uses valleys and hills for concealment, that avoids known concentrations of anti-aircraft batteries. How does he know this terrain so intimately? Because this is his home. He is not just a fighter pilot. He is a man flying over the land where he learned to walk, where he went to school, where he first kissed a girl and dreamed of a future that had nothing to do with war. Every landmark below has a memory attached. That river where he swam as a boy, that forest where he hunted with his father,
that town where his aunt still lives, if she survived the bombing raids, if she hasn't been consumed by the same fire that is devouring all of Europe. Your number 2 engine begins to sputter. The oil pressure gauge drops toward 0, the needle falling with the finality of a judge's gavel. You feather the propeller, stopping its rotation before it can tear itself apart and damage the wing. 3 engines now, 3 out of 4. The B-17 can fly on 3 engines, the manuals say. The instructors promised you this, but the manuals and instructors never mentioned flying on 3 engines with massive structural damage, with half your hydraulics gone, with fuel leaking from punctured tanks, and the constant possibility that something critical will fail in the next second, the next minute, the next mile. Franz sees the engine failure. He adjusts his position slightly, staying with you, maintaining the illusion or reality of protection. You are crossing into what should be the most dangerous part of your journey, the zone where German fighters patrol, where anti-aircraft guns cluster around strategic targets, where every eye on the ground is trained to spot enemy aircraft and direct fire toward them. But Franz's presence creates a bubble of confusion, a moment of hesitation in the minds of gunners and observers who see a Luftwaffe fighter escorting what appears to be, what? A captured aircraft? A friendly bomber in enemy colors? The cognitive dissonance buys you seconds, then minutes, then miles.
The North Sea appears on the horizon like a promise written in gray ink, a line where land surrenders to water, and water becomes the boundary between nations, between allegiances, between the world where Franz Stigler's protection means something, and the world where you might, just might, survive to see tomorrow. But that line is still 30 kilometers away, perhaps 40, and each kilometer is its own negotiation with physics and probability and the slowly failing systems that are keeping your fortress in the air. The number 1 engine is running rough now, misfiring, coughing black smoke that streams behind you like a funeral banner. Your airspeed has dropped to 135 knots, barely above stall speed for an aircraft this heavy, this damaged, this laden with the weight of wounded men and spent ammunition and the accumulated trauma of sustained combat. Franz checks his fuel gauge. The needle hovers near the red line, the zone where decisions become irreversible. He has already stayed with you longer than tactically sound, longer than any reasonable interpretation of duty would require. Every minute he remains at your wing is a minute of fuel consumed, a minute of distance from his base, a minute closer to the point where his own survival becomes uncertain. Fighter pilots learn to calculate these margins instinctively, to always know the exact distance they can travel and still return home. He has crossed that line. He is now committed to this act of mercy in a way that extends beyond choice. It has become consequence, simple and absolute. You glance at him again through the shattered remnants of your cockpit glass, and this time your eyes meet directly. Not pilot to pilot, not enemy to enemy, but human to human. 2 men suspended in a moment that exists outside the normal flow of war, outside the categories and definitions that allow nations to send their young men to kill each other in the frozen sky. His face is impassive, professional, but you see something in his eyes, not pity, which would be unbearable, but recognition. He sees you, not as American, not as target, not as the enemy, but as a young man who wants desperately to live, who has people waiting for him somewhere, who is trying with every fiber of his being to hold together an aircraft that should have fallen from the sky 10 minutes ago. Inside your fortress, your crew has gone quiet. The usual chatter on the intercom,
The constant flow of position reports and damage assessments and dark humor that keeps men sane in combat has ceased. They have all seen the German fighter by now. They all understand what is happening, or failing to understand it, have at least registered its impossibility, its defiance of everything they were taught about the enemy and the nature of this war. Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, your ball turret gunner, has climbed up from his position, bringing news you already suspected. Your tail gunner is dead. A single piece of flak entered the tail section at precisely the wrong angle, and Charlie Quinlan died instantly, probably without even knowing what killed him. 23 years old, from Pittsburgh, wanted to be a teacher after the war. Now he's cargo, weight you have to carry home, a body that will be wrapped in canvas and shipped back to a family who will never fully understand how or why their son died on a December day over Germany. Franz sees the coastline approaching and makes his decision. He cannot follow you over the water. To do so would be to abandon any pretense of having acted within the ambiguous gray zone of military discretion. Over land, he can claim confusion, can construct some story about identifying your aircraft, about following standard procedure. Over the North Sea, there is no story that holds, no explanation except the truth, that he chose mercy over duty, humanity over obedience, the immediate and particular over the abstract and strategic. He has already risked everything. He will not throw his life away in a gesture that changes nothing. You will survive or you won't, based on your own skill and the integrity of your aircraft and pure chance. His role in this strange drama is ending. He pulls alongside one final time, close enough that you can see every detail of his face, can memorize the features of the man who saved your life for reasons you may never understand. He is young, you realize, not as young as you, but young nonetheless, weathered by war, but not yet consumed by it. There is no hatred in his face, no triumph, no emotion you can easily name, just a kind of profound weariness, the exhaustion of a man who has seen too much and done too much, and who has just chosen, perhaps for the first time, to do something that feels clean. He raises his hand again, not a salute this time, just a gesture, a wave, an acknowledgement, and then he banks away, turning back toward Germany, toward his base, toward whatever consequences await him. His fighter rolls gracefully, catching the weak December sunlight on its wings for just a moment, and then it is gone, swallowed by distance and haze and the vast indifference of the winter sky. You are alone again, but you are not the same pilot that limped away from Bremen 40 minutes ago. Something has shifted in you, some fundamental assumption about the nature of enemy and friend, about the possibility of grace in the midst of mechanized slaughter. You push the throttles forward on your 3 remaining engines, coaxing every last ounce of power from machinery that should have failed already. The North Sea grows closer, gray water, white caps, cold that would kill you in minutes if you have to ditch. But beyond that water, England, home, safety, life. Your co-pilot, Spencer Pinky Luke, breaks the long silence. "Did that just happen?" he asked, his voice rough with cold and shock and something that might be the beginning of tears. "Did a German pilot just save our lives?" You don't answer immediately. You are too busy flying, too busy holding together an aircraft that wants to fall apart, too busy being 21 years old and responsible for getting 8 living men and 1 dead man home. But eventually, as the coastline of Germany recedes behind you and the impossible begins to transform into the merely improbable, you speak. "Yeah," you say. "Yeah, he did." And you know, with absolute certainty that you will never forget his face.
The decades pass like pages turning in a book you cannot put down, each year carrying you further from that December day in 1943, but never truly away from it. You land at Kimbolton, your base in England, with no hydraulics, no brakes, the B-17 shuddering to a stop in a spray of mud and grass as you ground loop deliberately to kill the speed. The crew chief who meets you at the aircraft takes one look at the damage and goes pale. He counts the holes, more than 200, and shakes his head slowly, the way mechanics do when confronted with something that violates their understanding of what metal and physics should allow. How, he asks, but you have no answer that makes sense. How do you explain that you survived not just the flak and the fighters and the mechanical failures, but also survived the moment when you should have died at the hands of an enemy pilot who chose differently? You file your mission report, and in it you mention the German fighter, but your words feel inadequate, pale shadows of the reality you experienced. The intelligence officer nods and makes notes and asks clinical questions about the aircraft type and markings, reducing the encounter to data points, to information that might be tactically useful. You want to grab him by the shoulders and make him understand that something extraordinary happened up there, something that transcends tactical analysis. But you are 21 years old and exhausted and still shaking from cold and fear and the weight of Charlie Quinlan's death. So you answer the questions and sign the form and return to your barracks, where you lie awake all night, seeing Franz Stigler's face every time you close your eyes. You fly more missions, not the full 25. The damage to your body and psyche from that first mission is too severe, the nightmares too persistent, the startle reflex too pronounced. The Army Air Corps grounds you eventually, sends you home with medals and commendations and the hollow gratitude of a nation that has no idea what to do with the young men it has broken in its defense. You return to civilian life. You marry. You have children. You build a career. You move through the decades doing all the things that constitute a normal American life in the latter half of the 20th century. But part of you never leaves that cockpit, never stops flying alongside that German fighter, never stops wondering about the man who saved you. Franz Stigler lands at his base with fuel tanks nearly empty, and he tells no one what he has done. He files a report claiming mechanical issues, claiming he lost track of the bomber in clouds, claiming anything except the truth. His commanding officer, Gustav Rodel, looks at him with eyes that seem to see through the lies, but says nothing. Perhaps he knows. Perhaps he understands that there are some acts of humanity that must be protected by silence, wrapped in the camouflage of plausible deniability. Franz continues to fly. He survives the war, which is itself a kind of miracle. Most fighter pilots do not, the mathematics of sustained combat eventually catching up with skill and luck and willpower. He emigrates after the war, leaving a Germany that has been bombed into rubble, leaving the ghosts and memories and the weight of all those kills that seemed necessary at the time, but which sit heavier with each passing year. He moves to Canada, builds a life, never speaks of the war, the way so many veterans on both sides choose silence over the impossible task of explaining what it was like, what they did, what they witnessed. He marries, he works, he ages, and inside him, carried like a seed that never quite germinates, is the memory of that day when he let an enemy bomber escape, when he chose mercy over duty, when he acted not as a soldier, but as a human being who recognized another human being's desperate will to live. 46 years pass.
46 years during which you, Charlie Brown, carry the memory of that encounter like a talisman, like a piece of evidence that the world is not entirely ruled by cruelty and necessity. You tell the story occasionally, at reunions of your old bomber crew, at gatherings of veterans, but always with the awareness that it sounds impossible, that without witnesses it might be dismissed as embellishment or confusion, or the way memories distort over time. In 1986, you decide you must find him, the German pilot, the man who saved your life. You must know his name, must shake his hand, must say thank you for a gift that has defined your entire existence since that day. You begin a search that seems hopeless from the start. How do you find one pilot among thousands? How do you locate a man whose name you never knew, whose face you saw only through cockpit glass and frozen air, who might be dead or might have never spoken of that day to anyone? You place advertisements in German veteran publications. You write letters to Luftwaffe historical societies. You describe the encounter, the location, the date, the type of aircraft, and you wait. Months pass. Then a letter arrives from Canada, from a man named Franz Stigler, who says simply, "I was the pilot. I remember you." The meeting, when it finally happens, is not dramatic. Two old men, both in their 70s, both carrying the accumulated weight of lives lived in the shadow of that one encounter. You shake hands in a hotel lobby, and for a long moment, neither of you can speak. What do you say to the man who killed your enemies but spared you? What does he say to the man whose life he chose to value over orders and doctrine and national loyalty? The words, when they come, are simple. "Thank you," you say. "I had to," he replies. And in those few syllables is contained everything that cannot be explained: the mystery of conscience, the unpredictability of mercy, the way individual human choice can sometimes puncture the armor of institutional violence. You become friends, not just acquaintances, not just two veterans sharing war stories, but genuine friends who speak weekly, who visit each other, who collaborate on a book about that day, because the story needs to be told, needs to be preserved as evidence that even in the heart of total war, even in the frozen sky over enemy territory, humanity can assert itself, can choose the particular over the abstract, the living person over the strategic objective. Franz Stigler dies in 2008. You die in 2008, just months apart, as though having found each other, you could not bear to exist separately for long. The story survives you both. It lives in books and documentaries, and in the imagination of anyone who hears it and feels something shift inside them, some small recalibration of what they believe possible about human nature and moral choice, and the way individual acts of mercy can echo across decades. This is what survival means, finally. Not just the continuation of biological function, not just the escape from immediate danger, but the long work of understanding what your life has been spared for, what meaning you can extract from the arbitrary moments when death passed over you and took someone else instead. You survived that day in December 1943 because a German pilot made a choice that defied everything his training and his nation and the logic of war demanded. And you spent the rest of your life trying to be worthy of that choice, trying to honor it by living fully, by seeking connection, by refusing to reduce human beings, even enemy human beings, to categories and abstractions. In the end, this is the story that matters most, not the bombing runs or the medals or the official histories, but the moment when two men, suspended between earth and heaven, between duty and conscience, between the past and the future, chose to see each other, really see each other. And in that seeing, everything changed. The war continued, the killing continued. History moved forward with its usual indifference to individual acts of grace. But somewhere in the frozen sky over Germany, in a moment that lasted perhaps 30 minutes of clock time, but will echo forever in the realm of moral possibility, mercy proved stronger than orders, and two lives were forever bound together by the simple, extraordinary decision to choose life over death.